Hey folks, before we get started, I just want to let you know about my upcoming book, The Max Coder's Guide to Finding Your Dream Developer Job. If you're looking for a job or you think you might be looking for a job in the future and you're trying to up your mobility and meet new people and things like that, this book walks you through the whole process. Go ahead and check it out. It comes out on November 20th. It'll be on Amazon, and you can find it as The Max Coder's Guide to Finding Your Dream Developer Job.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Views on Vue. I'm Elizabeth Fine, Senior Front-End Engineer. And today on our panel, we have Ari Clark, UI UX Engineer at Liquid.
Hello.
And Ben Hong, Senior Front-End Engineer at GitLab.
Hello.
So today is a panelist episode where we wanted to talk about an important topic to the development community at large, not just the Vue community, which is mental health.
The thing that I believe most about top-notch developers is that they're constantly learning. Whether you're out watching videos, whether you're reading blog posts or books, whether you're out writing open source software, you're always out there learning how to be a better developer. And my friends at Thinkster and I teamed up and we put together a show called the Dev Ed Podcast. You can find it at devedpodcast.com. It's run by Joe Eames, who you might know from JavaScript Jabber, Adventures in Angular, and Views on Vue. And they have terrific conversations about what it means to become a better developer, to learn how to do development, and the ways that you can learn. So if you're looking for inspiration and ideas about how you can do better and learn better as a developer, then go check out the Dev Ed Podcast.
So, Ben, what do you do in your free time? Meaning hours outside of your development time?
You would think that after being on this for a while, I'd have an answer to that, but I spend so much time with open source and community stuff that it's actually really hard for me to answer this question, which is...
I think that is your answer though, right?
I don't have free time and I spend it on coding.
But that is your free time. You're choosing to give back to the community with that time, which, God,
yes,
making me feel bad.
More like putting out fires, and then there's just fire after fire. That's one thing I know from my end. It's not so much about it sounds really altruistic, like I'm giving back to the community all the time. But sometimes I think developers, those feeling there's just this like fear of missing out, that FOMO effect. So whenever someone's like, hey, do you want to help out with this project? And you're kind of like, oh, that project could be big. I'm kind of, okay, yeah, I'll help with that. And then someone else like, can you help a little bit with this? And the next thing you know, you have like all these obligations and social contracts that you're like, oh, I don't want to let anyone down. And next thing you don't know where all of your time's gone.
So you're saying you have a hard time saying no, Ben?
Yes, that is the problem. Yes, saying no and fear of missing out are two things that have plagued me, especially in combination with the imposter syndrome. Oy vey.
Oh, God, yeah. I can relate to that.
I've never had that.
Share your wisdom with us, Ari.
Just kidding.
Ari, what about you? What do you do in your non-developer time?
Well, recently I've been desperately trying to prepare a talk for my first conference talk. No comment on how that's going. Other than that, I absolutely make a point to do frivolous things. I like binge watching TV and playing video games that I've played 1,000,000 times before and just hanging out with my husband. I have to say, I look at people like Ben and there's a degree of guilt associated with it. But at the same time, I'm like, but sanity. I'm useless without that.
And that's kind of part of the problem, I think, of what you were describing, Ben, is a lot of times we look at other developers and there are these powerhouse developers that, they're creating open source projects. They have amazing day jobs. They're giving talks at conferences and they're mentoring people and running communities. And you just think, man, I need to step it up. But at the same time, it's important to look and respect your own mental health, and give yourself a break from the developer world if that's, what you need to be productive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Elizabeth, what about you? What do you do in your spare time?
Someone asked me this the other day, a friend of mine, she just texted me. So just curious, what are your hobbies? And I thought, oh my God, I was so anxious and I spent half a day thinking about how to respond because I was like, okay, what are my hobbies? Well, coding, reading about coding. And I thought, I can't answer with that. You know what I mean? Like she wants to know what my real hobbies are. And
clearly, you're not spending much time on dating sites, or you'd have that nailed down.
Yeah.
I like hiking and
Long walks on the
dogs.
beach.
Yeah.
Well, I thought about it. I was going to say, I like hiking, but then I was like, do I really like hiking? Someone asked me to go hiking. You know, she actually asked me to go hiking at 7 a.m. on a Sunday, and I said no. So I thought, okay, I can't answer with that.
I'm so glad you're honest about that because, man, so I live in Colorado and you're a pariah here if you do not like hiking. Like, it is literally a miracle I met my husband on a dating app here. Because, yeah, like I finally had to just put the disclaimer in my profile. I don't enjoy hiking.
Yep. It's good to just be honest. Definitely.
I feel like there's this difference between what we actually do in our free time and like our aspirational free time.
Yeah, aspirational hobbies.
Like the types of hobbies that we believe would make us an awesome person. And we're like, in my head, I would like to do that. So that counts, right? But then when it comes down to it, you're like, would I actually like to do that?
You know what's funny though? I've met a lot of developers and they're, people I would think of as really good developers and really successful in their career. And they've said to me things like, I don't code in my free time. Like I only code at work, which I don't know how they do that because I feel as though the front end community changes so fast that if I'm not reading constantly, I will miss things and be behind on my day job. But it just kind of goes to show that you don't need to spend all of your free time keeping up with, front end news and front end tech and practicing this or that to actually be successful in your career.
Yeah. I'm not somebody who has side projects, if I'm being honest. Again, it's one of those like aspirational hobbies. But yeah, I think that there's this sort of unrealistic expectation of what time outside of work spent, keeping up looks like. Like, I actually feel like I have a pretty healthy balance of how I approach learning in my spare time. So I have a long commute, and one thing I do is I listen to a crap ton of podcasts. So like it's this sort of, there's not much else I can do during that time. So I might as well use it to sort of try to absorb new information. And honestly, it can be difficult to really like grasp like extremely technical things on a podcast because I'm a visual learner. So, but it at least exposes me to ideas. And so like when the time comes where I need to grab for some tool, I have an awareness of what tools are available to at least explore. And the other thing I do is I'm pretty active in the VoV Slack. And I think just having a community of developers around you to just sort of bounce ideas off of, and sometimes not even talk about anything related to development, I think is another really great way to sort of keep up with things and feel like you're not a total failure as a developer because you're not coding.
Yeah, on the topic of keeping up with things, I used to have a big problem with that. And I don't know about you all, but I have this bookmark list of things I'm supposed to read later on. And it only grows, it never shrinks.
Yep.
And at one point, a buddy of mine, Hung Soo, told me there's really two types of information. There's just in case information, which is what a lot of us try to do. We try to hoard information, right? We try to learn everything just in case we do this. But this is obviously exhausting in a time where the internet has infinite number of resources. So he says he taught me to focus more on information, like just in time information. So when I need it, learn it, then keep moving on. And because it's sort of like how keeping up with news, right? If I try to keep up with the news, it's exhausting, it's depressing. But I kind of just actually shut that off. And then the really important stuff, it'll bubble up naturally because it's that important. Someone's going to tell me, some headline's going to catch somewhere. But if I actively try to keep up with it, it's just, oh my God, so much.
Oh yeah, no, that trying to keep up with news or just like, I don't know, exposing myself to any significant amount of news, the anxiety is real. I can't I would think I was like 20 or something when I realized I was like, wow, this is actually just really bad for me. Because I used to my screensaver was like, an RSS feed of headlines. And I was like, it was especially because it was a time in my life where I was really struggling with my mental health. And I was like, just like laying on the couch, like just in a haze of depression, and like the screensaver clicked on, and it was some like horribly depressing headline about, somebody doing something awful to a child. And I was like, I don't need this in my life. I'm gonna cut this out now.
Yeah.
Yeah, the really important things, they'll bubble up. They'll get to you. If it doesn't, it didn't matter.
When you hoard information, I think the general tendency is you're not going to remember it anyways.
Oh yeah, no, I never
Then
do.
you're just going to, yeah. I mean, I've gone through periods of time where I have done, what you were just describing, Ben, where I've got a really long reading list and I'm hoarding information. I'll spend, half a day just reading articles. And I don't remember any of that stuff because it wasn't applicable to me at the time.
Yeah.
And so it just went in my brain and kind of got lost, and it's probably gone now. Whereas if I had actually needed to apply it to something, I would have more context to remember it next time.
Yeah, I totally agree with that concept of just-in-time learning. I guess without realizing that's what I was doing, that's generally the approach I tried to take is, have an awareness of what's out there, but you don't need any, okay, I guess it's like breadth of knowledge versus depth of knowledge. Mm-hmm. I think it's extremely valuable to have a wide breadth of knowledge, but only go deep on a topic when you need to.
Like, I know a prime example for myself is, as most people probably know, Vue 3, the entire core library is written in TypeScript. But I have not done any TypeScript on a project. And
shame. No, I'm kidding.
I feel guilty, right? Like, I really should be doing TypeScript. But the reality is that my projects we're not ready for that yet. So, I'm trying to find ways to make it happen, right? So maybe get my team to do TypeScript so that I can do that just-in-time learning. But, it's easy to feel like you gotta, especially with all the work I do with the Vue core team, it feels like it's an obligation. I should learn it, but,
Okay, Ben, I'm gonna let you off the hook here because I don't think you should know it. Because here's what I do know, Ben, is that you know a lot about when it's the right tool, why it's the right tool, why it might be the wrong tool. Because we've had that talk here on this podcast. Yeah. Like the things that are relevant to you being able to use it, you have. And in all honesty, I personally didn't find it particularly difficult to pick up. Like I used it on a project that I had like 2 weeks to do. And honestly, I only picked up the TypeScript part like 5 days before I had to deliver the project. Right. So, I mean, I'm not going to say I'm an expert on it, but I know enough.
I don't know. I think there's this fear that I'll go to a conference one day. Someone will be like, yeah, how's it working with TypeScript? And I'll like, oh no, they found me out. I don't know anything. I just know what it is.
Yeah, no, okay. I'm going to admit one particular topic I have horrible imposter syndrome about. Async await. I still don't know how to use it. I just use promises because I know how to use them. Because I don't know. I find the syntax confusing. All right. So if anyone else out there feels the same way, you're not alone. And now everyone is like, oh man, this girl knows nothing. Stop listening to this podcast.
Not at all.
Not true.
I definitely don't use async await as much as I should either.
I just I see everybody using it in like every example. Actually something that I recently realized is we end up with all these like buzzword topics, like GraphQL. And like, if you're just looking at like, new blog articles, et cetera, like any new content that's coming out, it would appear that the entire world is using things like GraphQL.
Which is so not the case.
Exactly. Having mastery over, less brand new technologies, like is still totally valid. Mm-hmm. And, trying to come up with solutions to using technologies that maybe aren't brand spanking new still have value.
Right.
So I guess it's that whole concept of JavaScript fatigue where it's something new every freaking day.
Yeah, I think my policy is when there's something super new, let's say when GraphQL first came out, like I made a point to at least understand generally what it was. So for example, it's like an alternative to REST API and it has this cool, graph thing. And that's all I learned. And it wasn't until much later when like the lead architect at my team was like, we're looking into alternatives to REST. And I was like, oh, there's a thing called GraphQL. I'm not an expert, but I can look into it. Yeah. Then that's how I actually got some more hands-on experience with it.
Yeah, like I've never used GraphQL, but I would say I know a lot about its use cases.
So from what we've been talking about, I'm guessing that you both suffer from burnout occasionally, developer burnout.
What's that?
So what are some things that you do, Ari, to alleviate that for yourself?
For me, one of the things I generally have to do, and I mentioned earlier, I tend to listen to a lot of podcasts, but honestly, I have to cycle that. Like if I am doing that every drive, every day for weeks on end, it starts to feel very overwhelming. Honestly, too much of that type of information really can exacerbate imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Because you're like, wow, all these people are super smart. What am I doing here? And so like sometimes I have to not listen to podcasts for a while. But then I find that if I do that for too long, then I start like stagnating and just becoming sort of apathetic towards my work. And then I have to start again. So I guess a lot of it is just figuring out what I need when I need it. And also, like if you are fortunate enough to work at a company that has like an unlimited PTO policy or at least a fairly loose PTO policy, I am not one to hesitate to just take a day off. Like sometimes I wake up in the morning, I'm like, I cannot do this today. And if I try to do this, it's only going to make it worse. So I'm going to send an email and say personal day, which I mean, for being honest, like I sometimes feel like shame and guilt in that because it's like, oh, people are probably judging that, but people are going to judge you no matter what. You might as well be mentally healthy while they judge you.
A lot of times I think to myself that shame that I feel towards myself when I do something like that is blown way out of proportion in my head. Because
probably.
When I see someone else take a personal day, I literally do not care. Like I'm like, oh, it's another Slack notification. You know what I mean?
That's like good for you.
So yeah. So you think in your head, everyone thinks I'm a slacker. Everyone thinks I'm faking being sick. It's just not true. No one cares. If anything, they're probably happy because it makes them feel better about when they need to take a personal day.
And actually, you brought up an interesting point when you said they're probably faking being sick. I only recently came around to the realization that a mental health day is a sick day.
Yes. Thank you. I agree with that.
And like, I had to stop trying to, come up with some dramatized version of like events in my life to justify, a personal day. Like mental health is just as important as physical health.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, the reality is I no longer say personal day. I only say personal day if it's actually that I need to help my husband take care of his mental health, which is something I do because he has bipolar 2 disorder and my mental health is better if his is better. So to me, that's a totally valuable thing to do. But yeah, I finally was just like, I'm not feeling well today because I'm not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. It doesn't have to be a physical feeling. It can definitely be, I'm mentally not feeling well today. And you don't need to give details of that or anything.
Yeah.
Just say, I'm not feeling well. So Ben, what do you do to alleviate developer burnout?
So seeing as this is a podcast people are listening, for those who don't know, I'm first generation Asian American. So one of the challenges for me is always this sort of belief that Asians can output a lot more than the average person. And so there's also these cultural subtexts, like, Bruce Lee had this famous thing for saying, there are no such thing as limits. You got to break through, you got to work harder. And so one of the, and so it was like, for me, it's like this challenge of fighting against the natural current of just like, no, I'm not burned out. I just need to push harder and I'll break past this ceiling. Like I got to grow my abilities. There's some merit to, trying to toughen it out. But for me, I think what I've had to do lately is really focus on the people around me and why I'm doing not about myself. Like being on a podcast with the YouTube, for example, it's just so inspiring and like sort of energizing. Just remember that like it's not about the code, it's not about the project. It's always been about the people. And if you can like that, for me, that's always been good to just sort of pull myself out of the burnout mentality, just to remind myself why I'm doing all of this.
I totally agree. Especially in like the past, I guess 6 or so months, I have found that being a part of a community has helped tremendously. Even when it's just like having people to vent to, because like there's nothing worse than just sitting with like horrible negative emotions and like wondering, are my feelings even valid? I mean, just having people to say, no, it's valid. Like it helps you let go of that negative energy. So yeah, I totally agree that finding people to surround yourself with as a developer, I think is really key to managing symptoms of burnout.
What about yourself, Elizabeth? What do you do to manage burnout?
I used to have a lot more burnout than I do now. Back when I started, had my first developer job, working at a lot smaller company, which was very supportive, but also did not have the resources I have now, like people to QA my work and, proper project management. So things used to be...
I still don't know what that is.
Well, being a developer without a project manager is extremely stressful because you have to do all of that filtering yourself. And, what I used to do then is I just write myself a list. And don't take this as an example because this was a bad idea. I wrote myself a list of every single bug, every single task that everybody reported to me. And, as people would just come up to me at my desk and say, oh, this has to happen, this has to happen, I just add it to the list. I just do it and cross it out and do it and cross it out and do it and cross it out. And that was when I mentioned earlier before the show that I one time cried in the alley and then came back into work like nothing happened. That was during that time because
that's totally understandable.
I was just so overwhelmed. And being a new developer, I was kind of creating bugs as I was fixing them. So,
I've never done that.
What's that I still do that, but not nearly at the rate that I was before, especially, working on being so randomized and also QAing everything myself.
And when you're not given proper scope of a task, you end up having a lot of unintended side effects.
Yeah, totally. So what I learned from that is a couple things. I sort of do the same method where I set myself tasks for the day, but the list is a lot shorter. And I come up with my own expectations kind of how much I think I can do in a day. And I've learned that the people I work with are really supportive of that, and they do that themselves. So that helps. I definitely do not put as much pressure on myself to go home and do dev stuff as I used to, which helps. And the last thing that I do is I take the pressure off myself to know everything. So the other day I saw, I think it was a free code camp article, and the article had a diagram of what you think you know, which is this tiny, tiny dot inside this huge circle of what you think everybody else knows. So this is something that the longer I've been a developer, the more I've come to the realization that while the diagram still looks the same, where what I think I know is a tiny, tiny cross-section of what I think everybody else knows, I'm more and more accepting of that. I really am starting to let go of this intense pressure to feel like I have to know the answer to everything at every meeting, to feel like I have to do everything perfectly the first time, or I have to know every new technology like we were talking about before. This is starting to just completely become irrelevant to me because what I realize is even talking to senior developers, they have the same diagram in their head where everything that they think that they know is a tiny little dot, and everything that they think everyone else knows is a huge circle outside of that. It's never going to change. And the only thing you can do about it is take the pressure off of yourself. And since I took the pressure off of myself, I've found that people still think the same thing of me. It's not like people think I'm stupid now. It's not like people think I'm inexperienced now. In fact, letting go of that, I think, makes you appear more experienced because you're not coming up with answers that are completely made up that everybody can answer.
Wait, what? I don't do that in meetings.
I never talk in like vague terms just to, let people interpret what they think is the truth. Never do that.
Yeah, doing that just puts more stress on you in the end.
I know,
because then people have expectations of you.
I think there's been a theme sort of with what all of us have been saying, and that's self-imposed expectations that are completely mismatched with the reality of expectations around us and also the reality of what we can actually do realistically. And I mean, like even imposter syndrome, like honestly, that's where that comes from, is this feeling that you are not meeting your perceived external expectations. And so I think as I've gotten older, because, oh my God, I was a hot mess when I was younger. I'm not going to pretend I'm not still a hot mess, but less messy. I think self-forgiveness has been one of the most critical skills that I've learned. You know, being okay with my past choices, because it's not like I can do anything about them now. You know, forgiving myself for maybe not always knowing exactly the right thing to do, because nobody does. But also being mindful of what lessons I can take from my mistakes, and just, you know, hope that I have the mental presence to apply them in the future. I would honestly, I am so much my mental health is just so much better than it used to be. And a lot of that is, just sort of accepting life on life's terms. Like a couple of weeks ago, I picked radical acceptance, and that it was a turning point for me in life when I learned the concept of radical acceptance. And it absolutely takes practice. And part of how I sort of framed it when I was first learning how to practice radical acceptance was actually framing it around the serenity prayer, which is grant us the serenity of mind to accept that which cannot be changed, courage to change the things we can, and wisdom to know the difference. And so, you know, it's one thing to accept things, and just accepting things as a human is very hard. And so by following that with figuring out the things I couldn't change, and then the actions I could take that didn't involve imposing my expectations on other people, that really helped me with the acceptance part. Because a lot of times acceptance is hard because it makes us feel helpless.
Yeah.
And so following that with, okay, what actions can I take, sort of helped balance it. If expectations are something that you're struggling with, I really recommend learning how to practice radical acceptance. I have so many fewer emotional outbursts and tantrums. Yay.
Well, I also think building on that idea, I think a lot of times as developers, you know, we feel sort of all powerful because we can build things and put things on the internet and impact.
Yeah, and then we make a bug, and then we're the lowest of the low.
Right. But as a result, sometimes this means that I think when we're looking at ourselves, we're sort of putting ourselves in at the center of the universe, and that's a lot of pressure, right? Because you're like, I'm the one that has to do this, right? I'm the one that has to learn everything, and more importantly, you feel the obligation to figure it all out yourself. And especially when it comes to mental health, you know, there's still a stigma with this, and I can't express this enough. It's okay to have a therapist. Just because you have a therapist, it doesn't mean you don't need to have something tragic happen in your life, or, you know, even any sort of official mental disorder just to have a therapist. Therapists are great because a lot of times people talk about the tech bubble, right? And so, you know, with all the feedback you get from Twitter or GitHub, that's great. But one of the nice things about going to therapy, even if it's just a professional coach, right, just a one-off, people do that all the time. It's just great to hear a third person's perspective on what you're going through. I know at one point in my career, I felt this need to get validated by, you know, getting hired by one of the big tech companies, Google, Apple, Facebook. And that was that's how I was going to validate myself. And I think the professional coach is it seems like you're looking a lot to these other companies to validate you with certificates and stuff. And that's how you're defining your self-worth. And that was one of those oh, that's not good. That's a lot of power I'm handing over to these other people.
Yeah.
And so it's something to be careful of as you're working through your own journey.
Yep, totally agree.
The word you said, obligations, struck me. That feeling of obligations, I think, can also lead to people staying in jobs that are really toxic to their own mental health, which then becomes toxic to their physical health. And it just spreads throughout your entire life. Because, I know, there's this sense that your company would be lost without you, that, you know, you would be setting them back. But at the end of the day, you don't really owe them anything. If they're unable or unwilling to provide a healthy environment for you, you don't owe them your mental health for their product. Like you said, we're the center of the universe. And I think that we have this really weird tendency to both inflate our egos and deflate them simultaneously.
Very contradictory.
It's the developer magic trick. And so, accepting that we're not everything and it's okay to get out of a bad relationship. They will find someone to replace you. They will.
And life will go on.
Yeah. And they're probably not even going to hate you unless you, rage quit, which I mean, that might feel really good in that moment, just like knocking stuff off of people's desks. Like, I'm out, biatches. Later, though, you're probably not going to feel amazing and they're probably not going to like you very much. If you frame it as I need to seek new opportunities for my own growth, like if they hate you for that, they're just not a good human being. So you really don't want them as a reference.
You were never going to win anyways.
Yeah.
It's really important to treat yourself like you are your own business, because from a business perspective, if they didn't need you and the numbers didn't work out, they'd let you go and they don't care about whether or not you're lost without them. Companies do that all the time. So since you're in a contract with a company, you need to treat yourself like you're your own business. And if they and what they're offering you isn't working out for you, then, as long as you're cordial and considerate, if you leave to seek another opportunity, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You're just looking out for yourself. You're looking out for your own little brand and your own business. And that's it.
Yeah, you better believe that they would let go of you if they felt like they were being harmed by you.
Totally.
So.
Yeah. And so speaking of that, for, people newer in the field trying to break into it, most of us, I think they're called at will employment. So both parties can end it at any point. For those newer, be careful if someone tries to lock you into like an actual 1 year contract where breaking it could be a big financial hit on you, especially when you're just starting out in your career.
That's really uncommon. Don't do it.
Yeah. And if you're even thinking that it might be a good fit, again, do a couple month contract, let's see if it's a good fit before you sign up for something like that, because once you get stuck, it can be just hugely negatively impactful. So just be careful. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I'm curious for the both of you is, how do you all stay inspired, right? We're talking about trying to learn everything. I think we all have to remember that coding is actually a lot of fun, besides all the imposter syndrome and stuff.
I mean, sometimes.
It's fun to create things, right? And so how do you two sort of keep that flame alive?
So I did this thing where I joined a podcast. No. I think everyone should go out and do that. No, I'm kidding. But I mean, okay. But in all honesty, being on this podcast does help me stay inspired, because I get to connect with people doing things in my same realm, but that are very different from what I do. And so I can sort of see the possibilities with my skill set. But I also got a similar effect from just listening to podcasts and listening to other people's stories. I guess the key is other people.
How about you, Elizabeth?
I totally agree with that. So as far as getting inspired, it almost 100% comes from other people. And now that I say that out loud, that sounds kind of bad, but I do have a passion inside me. But
Totally fine.
Things like meetups, building communities, talking to people who are getting into the field. And if you are so interested in being a developer or being a front-end developer or learning CSS and things that I'm really passionate about, makes me see the beauty of those technologies and makes me want to go explore them more on my own time and things like that. So definitely meeting with other people helps me realize how much I love being a developer and talking to other people, being on this podcast, listening to other podcasts, like Ari was saying, and coming up with side projects, which also, I will say I am not a side project person. Like you said, Ari, I create side projects and then I abandon them. I'm a serial side project abandoner.
Okay, so, but you at least start them.
No, what's worse is buying domain names that you're never ever going to use. Like 100 of them.
I have to say, so many people post memes about that on Twitter, and I'm just like, I am so glad I can't relate.
I'm glad for you too.
Save me a lot of money.
I've wasted a lot of money.
Because here's the thing. If I started side projects, I would absolutely do that. Absolutely. So
it's hard not to. It's kind of the first step, but
because you're like, that's a really, I love that. Yeah, I better reserve that, because if I finish this and it's not available, whew.
Yeah, then it's all over. It's a useless project.
This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give you full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open sourced Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code devchat at sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code devchat at sentry.io.
I'd be interested to know which domain names you have, Ben.
Yeah, Ben.
Okay,
Tell us more.
I'll open up Namecheap. And if Eli Fitch is listening, I blame Eli Fitch for starting me down this path. It is your fault, Eli. No, I kid.
I should at least reserve my own name as a domain name. And yeah, I haven't done that. Because, full confession, I don't even spend my free time on a portfolio site. What?
That's how good you are. You don't need a portfolio. People just want to work with you.
Yeah, or I've managed to get a job without it, and I just stay there because finding another one is terrifying, and I might have to actually make a portfolio and update my resume, and I'm just getting anxious thinking about it.
All right, so some random domain names I had. Codechef.io, where I had this idea for a code academy where you learn how to cook cooking.
I was like, that's a solid domain name.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I have view.is.fun.
I love it.
Oh my God.
Victoria and I, we came up with the idea for View Pets, like Neopets, but again, nothing's happened yet. Just random stuff like that.
Oh my gosh.
I love view.is.fun. That's incredible. Well played.
Yeah, I just need to do something with it now.
Or you could just sell it to someone. Because I feel like a couple of those you could sell eventually.
Maybe.
Oh, one other thing that helps me stay inspired. And this sounds kind of lame, but it actually works for me. Find a crazy tutorial and do it. So a tutorial that uses these, new technologies that, you're saying, Ari, it seems like everybody's using, but you have no idea what they are. Find something like that. Find a really nuts CSS tutorial and do something cool with that. And just show yourself what you can do. Yeah, you copied all the code from some article that told you how to do it, but you still did it and now you know how. And so that kind of thing inspires me. Just looking at other people's portfolios, looking at other people's websites. I love doing that. I have one of them today as one of my picks.
Syndrome? Because, that just exacerbates my imposter syndrome.
It does. But in a good way. It's kind of like,
I guess maybe it matters what motivates you. Because, I'm the type of, oh man, I'm going to sound awful admitting this. I'm the type of person where I'm competitive. I like being the best at things. And so when it feels like there's zero hope of ever being the best at something, I'm just well, I don't even care about this anymore. It was dumb to begin with. I think looking at really advanced stuff, it just makes me feel bad about myself.
It does make me feel bad about myself, but it also shows me what I could do if I were better.
I'm starting to come around to that mentality because the reality is in our profession, no one will ever be the best. Mm-hmm. It's impossible. Everyone will always have a different set of complementary skills. That's why we have teams. But I look at stuff like Sarah Drasner makes. I'm just life goals, but not there.
Yeah, and on the flip side of that, for side projects, I know a lot of people are like, oh, I don't know what to do for side projects. And so I think it was Sarah Vieira who was just build stupid stuff. It's all the time we try to think of the perfect project that millions of developers would use. I'm no, just build stuff. If you have a fandom right now, you're really obsessed with a TV show, build a wiki page. It doesn't matter if Wikipedia exists already. Do what's fun for you. Build a matching game, and more importantly, it doesn't matter if someone else has already done it. This is actually really common with writers too. You always try to write something brand new, totally novel. Yeah, everyone's basically done some variant of something else. But sometimes the coolest projects are just random ideas that someone did and they just threw it out there and then it just caught on. But if it had never made that quote unquote stupid idea, it wouldn't have existed. And it's just some thoughts for how you might do your own side projects if you decide to do it.
Yeah, I'll keep that in mind, Ben. No. Right after I buy the domain name.
Well, like I'd love to see, Ari, like all the different games that you've played. If I could take like a JSON of that and like maybe do like an infographic of like showing like, I don't know. I feel like there could be some really fun stuff we could do with that.
Yeah.
Like one of the things I decided to do is I have a page where I try to keep like stuff I've watched, like a media log. And right now it's just like a straight, like very simple markdown file. But I'm like, I'm going to turn that into JSON and just like use D3 to like calculate like easily like how much time I spent watching TV a month or like.
I said, don't do that. I feel like that might be a really depressing revelation.
I don't know.
Or maybe I'm projecting, but.
I don't know. But I just kind of want to. It's again, but it's like stupid stuff that like it doesn't matter if no one else ever sees it, if it's ever like no one's gonna, but it's like do stuff that you think might be fun. And I think for those who want to do that project, that's a good way to go.
I want to say it was Chris who I heard on an episode before my time said, build something that you want to share with someone you care about. So usually that's going to be like, some sort of like common interest or just, if it's say like a parent, they're going to be proud of you no matter what. So you can basically build anything. Unless you have a terrible relationship with your parents or they're dead. Sorry.
No, but that's true though. Yeah. I was going to go into a whole thing about destructive UX, but then that's a totally separate topic.
Wait, what is that?
What's destructive UX?
So it's this, and actually, I'm really glad you caught yourself because it's one of those things where when you design a feature, but you often forget about so the UX designers are probably I'm probably thinking of something else, but it's the idea where you often forget to account for a use case. So in the instance the best example of this is Facebook Memories, where you're like, hey, remember a year ago you're friends with someone, they try to do all your and so in general, you think that's a really great feature. That's really nice that they automatically create a video.
Unless your mom died and
And so there's all these things where like we often make assumptions where like Father's Day is a great example where, where everyone said, oh, fathers, but like there are people who have terrible relationships with their dads or their dad isn't around. And so it makes these people feel terrible. And you're like, so what are you and your dad doing today? And then it's like, then you put them in such an awkward position.
I have absolutely had that exact experience.
Yeah, and I think it's hard though. I'm not saying you have to tiptoe around everyone, but it's just good to be conscious of those things that like, we make a lot of assumptions in sometimes the language we use. And so I thought it was good that you caught yourself that, to your point, not everyone has parents who might care or...
No, the worst part is I was literally describing my situation. That's why I was like, about that.
Well, we love you, Ari, and we are proud of everything you do, so you can always show us.
Yeah, good times. Dysfunctional families, woo! Actually, I feel like that we're talking so much about how, our jobs affect our mental health, but our families do too, right? You were saying, Ben, whether they were explicit expectations or not, the expectations that you've felt that were imposed on you your whole life. What are some strategies for dealing with that? I remember when I started at my coding boot camp, they had us write letters to people who are a huge part of our lives saying that we weren't going to be very present for the next 6 months.
Wow.
And, I really loved my instructors there. They were so thoughtful because setting those expectations for your loved ones based on what you're actually capable of delivering at that time. They were just trying to set us up for success by taking external pressure off of us. Have you guys had any experiences with things like that where either you should have set boundaries and didn't, or successfully set boundaries? Because that's super rare, at least for me. Actually, boundaries in general, boundaries with coworkers, etc. Because I feel like boundaries it's one of those things we don't talk about a lot in terms of mental health, but it's key.
It is very important.
We were talking about how Ben has a hard time saying no.
Yeah. So growing up first generation, my parents were immigrants and came here with nothing. And so they managed to build this whole life for themselves. So there's this, again, they don't put this pressure explicitly on me, but I feel that I need to do more, right? They had nothing and they did all this. So I naturally have to do 10 times what they've accomplished. And so as far as boundaries go, I think a lot of it for me has been learning more about other people's stories. So it's, again, not keeping my story so central to my identity. Not everyone has the ability to necessarily travel around as much as I have. But, this is where I think reading or just watching documentaries, like whatever your form of content consumption is, just willing to take things from different perspectives and learning about things that other people are going through always helps to really put things in perspectives for me, and also, just trying to, it's a balance. I definitely haven't solved it. There's always ebbs and flows for sure.
What? You're not perfect at life, huh? I'm so shocked, Ben. I thought of all people. Actually, I would have thought of all people. But it's good to know you're not perfect either.
It's the whole clown effect, right? Like the people you're expect to be so super happy have a lot of other problems.
Oh yeah, no, because I'm sure listeners have noticed I laugh a lot and I'm very energetic, but the reality is I suffer from clinical depression. You probably wouldn't have guessed that, but I do. So yeah, there you go. Awkward.
No, I think it's important to open up about these things, and just people go through these things, and again, just because you're not, and I don't want to invalidate others too, just because you don't have an official diagnosis doesn't mean you're not going through your own problems.
Yeah, and the reality is so many people go undiagnosed.
There you go, exactly, right?
Significant mental health issues, yeah.
Yep.
Because somehow, I think a lot of people maybe know that there is something there, but having an official label put on it can be extremely overwhelming. I absolutely had that experience when I was diagnosed with a mental illness when I was 18. And, I always knew I was weird, but, but to having this label slapped on you, it makes you feel less you. Because, people have these inaccurate expectations of what mental illness looks like for people. And so you think that as soon as you have that label on yourself, that people are going to view you through this different lens. So For me, I wish that I felt comfortable, I wish it was a detail of my life that I felt comfortable sharing off the bat with people. But I feel this need to have people frame their opinion of me before adding that layer. And that, to me, I often feel a bit hypocritical because of that. Because I'm all like, oh, we need to, stop the stigma around mental illness. But it's really hard because inevitably we're human and we want to connect with other humans, and we don't want to take actions that will prevent people from maintaining connections with us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in today's culture, it's really, we want to be binary about everything. You're either this or that. And so to your point, labels, we often take that and consume an entire person's identity in that one label.
Yeah,
you're a developer, you have clinical depression. And I think a global theme that's been going on a lot in this episode is that everything is just a part of a bigger whole. Yeah. And the more you can to avoid trying to treat something as a whole and just it's a part of a person, part of their story, part of their journey. I think it helps reduce, assumptions, judgments, and just pressure in general. Because, to your point about, depression earlier, there are people with seasonal affective disorder, but that comes in ebbs and flows. So someone might never think to ever get diagnosed because sometimes it's a problem, sometimes it's not, right? So,
or people who suffer from bipolar disorder. Sometimes they are super productive, everything's going great. And then sometimes they're this completely different person. And that can be hard because you're I don't even know how to describe how I feel. Because honestly, depending on when you go to the doctor, what you tell them could be totally different. Not that I have any experience with that. But so I think something that's another important thing to talk about is, not all of our listeners will suffer from mental illness, though. If I'm being honest, I think developers have a higher rate of mental illness than most other industries, just saying. But not all of them. So what are some ways that you guys find can be helpful, either from people supporting you or positive experiences that you've had supporting other people through difficult times? And what does being supportive even look like? Because I know for me, sometimes supportive is being there. Sometimes supportive is leaving me alone.
So for me, supportive is Also, I have OCD, so that's a little bit different, but it definitely
you're still in the club.
it definitely comes into dev stuff a lot. So I am like extremely overly paranoid about everything that I code, which is actually sometimes a good thing because it helps me catch stuff. But
Yeah,
I'll double check things, 10 times to the point where it's just completely irrational. And like before, I feel so weird telling the whole world about this, but before I go to bed at night, a lot of times I'll open up my computer and double check that I didn't accidentally merge anything, even though I'm like, I never even touched my computer since I got home. And I'm like, what if I just forgot about it? So I'll check that. My partner he'll be like, what? If I get out of bed at 10:30 or 11 o'clock because I'm like, oh, I forgot to check. He'll be like, you don't need to do that. What are you doing? And he's so confused, and he doesn't really know what I'm doing. So from his perspective, just being there for me and not judging me or asking too many questions helps me a lot. In terms of the people I work with, I don't think there's really anything they could do to help me besides, I don't know, not ask questions. I mean, no one really knows about it. No one would unless they observed what I was doing really closely. And most of my support just comes from myself, telling myself. And having a label actually, while it does add a sort of departure from my self-identity, having a label is actually a little bit relieving because I can say to myself, this is not, rational. This is not me. This is a disorder that I have that's causing me to have these sort of paranoid thoughts. And so, so it helps me to sort of think that way. It helps me to not judge myself too harshly for how I'm feeling and the things that I'm doing. And it also helps me to have, in a way, I sort of have an appreciation for the disorder because, like I said, sometimes I kind of need it. A lot of times I make really stupid mistakes. A lot of times I'll leave the stove on and I go back because of OCD to check it every single morning, and sometimes I'll catch myself.
No, I meant so you like validated it.
So I validated it. But yeah, I mean, I just try not to be too hard on myself. Yeah, that's really it for that kind of disorder. I can't speak towards, other mental health issues that people have. So what do you think, Ari?
So I always want to believe that there's some magical workplace where they have it all figured out, how to support employees with mental illness. Then the other side, I'm like, but it's something that's super uncomfortable to talk about in the context of work. Even when in the moments where it can absolutely affect work. I also have ADHD. I'm just a bag of fun, let me tell you. All of my disorders absolutely will have an impact on my work at one point or another. And it can be really hard, saying that you need support. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I guess all I can hope is that a newer generation of leaders and managers will come up and there will be explicit policies around, mental health and resources and what, burnout time off looks like. But until then, it's super awkward to have to talk about it with your manager.
Yeah. Well, I will say, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the show, having sick days that you can take as wellness days is such a tremendous help. I'm really lucky to have that where I work, where I can just say, you know what, I need to work from home today. No questions asked. Or I'm sick today. I can't come in. I don't feel well. And no questions asked. That's really helpful on behalf of the workplace.
And I also think that that's in the best interest of your employer because that's the type of thing that helps prevent burnout. Mm-hmm. And a burned out employee is a not productive employee. Mm-hmm. I wish there were more managers that were very open about, sick days are meant to be used for mental and physical health. Mm-hmm. I know some managers do that, but I also think that, we're in a traditionally male dominated industry. And so there's at least some amount of toxic masculinity that sort of frames the expectations. And, I'm a macho man. I don't have feelings. Just kidding. I feel like I could have pissed a lot of people off with that one. I was being facetious mostly.
For those who don't know, I actually have my background is actually trained in psychology. So I lean a little bit more on the support side of things. And so one of the reasons I actually didn't go into counseling, because I feel like I do a lot of it for my family and my friends. So I was like, I don't need to do that for my 9 to 5. But nonetheless, for those wondering how to provide support, a lot of it actually is, as we get older, I think it's very common to frame things based on your past experiences and your personal ones. And the problem with this is you're basically setting a bunch of assumptions on a person when you're like, it's no different than a doctor just hearing a couple symptoms and just assuming you have a sickness without really probing deeper as opposed to what's really going on. And so rather than trying to fix someone's problems, which I think, especially as developers, we love getting in and fixing things. When it comes to mental health, it's not about getting in there and fixing it for them. That's actually probably one of the worst things you can do for most people who are doing something.
Because I'm like, I don't actually need to be fixed per se. Thank you.
Right. And so, if you notice that your coworker is going through something, to Ari's point, sometimes giving them space is the very thing they need. On the other hand, simply listening, asking them questions, letting them express what they're feeling is a really good way to just let them, like in a non-judgmental space. I always try to tell people when I'm in one-on-one situation that it's a safe space, it's never going to leave this room. Tell me whatever you need. And so, inquire, let them tell their story, and don't, again, it's like this whole theme, this episode, like practice this with other people when you're out and about. Do not judge a sliver of an experience as their entire being. So if your server is being rude to you at a restaurant, for example, that doesn't make them a jerk. Like, yes, they might be having a really bad day, right? Maybe they're going through a divorce. They just got their kids taken away from them. Who knows what just happened? But reminding yourself that there is a bigger story at play and that we will never know everything that's going on helps to prevent us from making snap judgment decisions, which is, I think, is where a lot of conflict and just sort of misunderstanding comes into play. Because you think you know what they're going through, but you don't. And I think that's the number one thing you can do is you don't know what's going on. So be empathetic, ask questions, and don't assume you know what's happening. And in doing that, I think you'll end up you'll customize the right way to help that particular person. And then every time it's a new round. Don't be like, well, I did this 5 times already, so it's going to be the same. No, even the same person going through the same experience, it can be totally different. Don't make assumptions that it'll work the same way.
Ben, maybe you could speak a little bit to this. What are some signs that a coworker might be struggling? I'm going to go ahead and throw out unusual irritability because been there, did that.
To your point, like most people want to be collaborative. So if someone's feeling a little bit more withdrawn than usual, that's usually a good sign just to either just DM them on Slack or something to be like, hey, is everything okay? And they say, it's fine, period. Like you can decide whether, to probe a little bit more, give it some rest. We do this thing actually with our team, green, yellow, red check-ins. Try to like adopt that within your team mentality of letting people, just kind of let people know like, hey, this week, how are you feeling? Like, I'm yellow right now, like my condo redesign is like, just let them. It actually gives everyone a small mental visual state of what a person is going through. And again, it depends on how close your team is and whether this is feasible. But I find that red, yellow, green check-ins are actually really good for teams in general.
Explain more about how that works. Okay. I'm super curious.
Yeah. So basically you have like your weekly kickoff, right? You have your sprint, like beginning of the week, and you'll say, okay, red, yellow, green check-in. So I would be like, this week I'm a bit yellow because I have a lot of deadlines, but also, the condo renovation I had going on is kind of a mess. We thought things were going to go well. So it's just a little bit stressful right now. So I'm yellow right now. And so that lets people know like, hey, like Ben has some stuff going on, but like, it's not that he's checked out of work or anything. Because if you're red, that probably means you need to take some time off. And that's usually what we would obviously encourage. But it just gives a good way of just letting people, basically you surface the fact that some stuff's going on in your life. And just, it helps actually, I think it builds this team camaraderie.
Is there any sort of like expectation that if you are anything other than green, that you elaborate on it, or can you just be like yellow? I want to talk about it.
Yeah, you could just say that. If this is something you're trying to introduce, obviously I think it's important for the person taking the lead to probably overshare. And when I say overshare, just like feel comfortable knowing that it's okay to share things without feeling like they're going to be penalized for it or judged for it. Like someone's going to be writing this down somewhere being like, ooh, yeah, Ben's been yellow for a few weeks now. Like, this is.
But okay, actually, I was sort of curious about that. Like, if someone is like reporting yellow like for many weeks in a row, Does that ever flag for like a manager to be like, hey, just wanted to check in?
Yeah, I would say hopefully your managers do have like one-on-ones. Those are great ways to check in. Even when I didn't have that at certain teams, I would just make a point to reach out to my coworkers to be like, hey, you want to get coffee sometime? And then they've been yellow for a little while just to see how they're doing, see what's going on. But again, more importantly, sometimes it's helpful to separate it out. So I'll be like, I'm green work-wise, right? Like deadlines are working well. A little bit yellow personal life, just got some stuff going
on. I like
on.
that. Yeah.
That way it helps just to separate that out a little bit. But that's
but then like the next week, if you don't do that and you're just like yellow, they're like, oh, he's yellow with work too.
Yeah. So normally for those wondering, yellow for work usually means that you have more blockers than you thought or more bugs came up than you expected. And that should be expected that your colors will fluctuate over time.
Could it also signal that you have unrealistic deadlines or?
Sometimes, and it's important for engineering managers to then manage that expectation. But maybe for this week, instead of 5 points of tickets, take the 3, see how you're feeling. But I think empathy is really key for managing this.
That sounds like a really awesome system. I'm jealous.
I love that idea because it would help me understand how to approach people in my team.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times I try to be really, really conscious of, asking people questions or bothering people for stuff because I just don't know what they're going through. And a lot of times I think I over-exaggerate what they might be going through, if someone's moving or has issues with like a renovation, like you're saying, and I will just not ask them anything. And it'd be good to know if they're feeling good, if they're, wanting to be approached at the current time, for this or that reason, or if they're not. And so that way I can respect how they're feeling.
Because it's super fun when like you go to ask like a coworker or even a superior a question and they just like pretty much bite your head off and you're like, is it me or is it them?
Right.
Yeah.
And then like you spend the rest of the day like, does he hate me? But like having like a heads up of like maybe unless it's absolutely necessary, leave them alone. Mm-hmm. I think that's just a generally good way to frame interactions on a team. Gives some insight because like you said, you never, for the most part, you never know what someone's going through. But I like that that's a way to sort of change that dynamic and give some insight so that you can adjust accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
Now I want to quit my job and work somewhere else. No, I'm just kidding. Love my job. I hope that some listeners at least like hear that and try to implement that at their own work. That would be so awesome.
Yeah, definitely.
Changing lives, Ben. Changing lives.
We've been recording Ruby Rogue since 2011, and we've talked to a lot of people who have had a really deep influence, not only on the programming community, but also on the Ruby community. And as we've talked to these people, it's become apparent to me that we talk a lot about the things that make them interesting that they've done, but we don't really get into how they got into programming or how they came up in their career, how they got to be the person who invented whatever library or technique that they came on the show to talk about. And so I put together a show where we actually highlight these things. We talk to them about how they got into programming. We talk to them about how they got into Ruby, maybe how they got into Rails. We get a little bit deep into what makes them tick and why they are the way they are. And then we talk about what they're working on. We talk about the things that make them well known or make them interesting. And a lot of times it's the stuff that goes beyond the code that really makes these people tick and makes them the kind of people that we want to hear about. And so I put together a show called My Ruby Story. You can find it at myrubystory.com. And it's where I interview these people and just get the stories of these people and how they came into programming. So if you want to hear inspirational stories or get ideas on how you can actually advance your career, then go check it out at myrubystory.com.
Should we move on to picks?
I think so.
Okay. Ari, would you like to go first?
Sure. Okay, so my pick this week is a limited series on Netflix called Unbelievable. Content warning, it's intense. I would say in the vein of like True Detective. And I would say in terms of content, more in the vein of season 1, if you're familiar. So just be aware of that. If sexual assault is something that triggers you, you do not want to watch this at all. I'm not going to give too much away, but amazing acting in it and just a really great example of 2 very different but very strong women making sure that other women get justice. So yeah, that's my pick. Unbelievable.
Awesome. I'll have to check that out. And Ben, do you have picks for us this week?
Yeah, I got 3 picks this week. First of which, I just got back from Cream City Code, which is a local conference out in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And so I had a chance to go out there and, check out the Cheese City and all that stuff. And it was a lot of fun. So a big shout out to the organizers there for doing such a fantastic job. For those looking for a conference out there, Green City was a lot of fun. Highly recommend it. And my second pick's related to that because as part of the conference, there was Steve Aoki came and did like a live performance. So I've been listening to a bit of Steve Aoki. And so for those who don't know, that's he does a decent amount of EDM stuff, but he has some mainstream stuff as well with like BTS and a couple of other artists. And my final pick is Abstract, which is a Netflix documentary on like design. Came out with season 2 recently. And so I just watched the second episode. Ian Spalter, who was the digital product design for Instagram's redesign. And so it was really fascinating getting to see the behind the scenes of what it took to take Instagram from its early days into what everyone knows it now and the decisions that kind of go into it. There's even a really great part where we get introduced to the person who basically invented Infinite Scroll. And it's funny because he's like, yeah, that's the one thing I'm probably going to have to atone for like the rest of my life because I had no idea.
Yeah.
And it was just interesting to hear designers talk about like the importance of having a stopping point with, like Infinite Scroll. It seems like a good idea at first, but then the user can never stop anymore, right? It's like this. And he's like, I invented this thing that has wasted millions of human hours, lives, right? Because people just keep going through it. Anyways, so it's super relevant to our field, so highly recommended. People want to check it out. And those are my picks.
That is awesome. I'll have to check that one out too. I've got some Netflix to catch up on. Okay, and I have 2 picks this week. The first one is a portfolio I found on CodeDrops, and the person who made it is called Domenico BRZ. I think BRZ is an abbreviation for his last name, but the portfolio is domenicobrz.github.io, and it's really, really cool. And the cursor is legendary.
Oh, legendary.
Check it out.
Okay.
Yeah,
really
legendary.
Cool. It's really cool.
And the next pick I have is the Vue 3 cheat sheet on viewmastery.com. You can just go on there and download a free Vue 3 composition API cheat sheet. And ViewMastery has really nice cheat sheets. They're really easy to read. They're really well laid out. So if you want to get a little look at that, go ahead and download it. I did, and it's pretty awesome. And that's it for this episode of Views on Vue. Thank you for joining us. Until next week, enjoy the view.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.